That's funny, Gus. I've always thought that my ego didn't bother me. I might be in a lot more pain than I think. Egos may come in many forms, including different sizes, colors, and shapes. More and more as I age, I understand that I can't do what I need to do without God's help. He is finally telling the truth at age 90 about the bad news behind his business. The man who used to make $500,000 a day is telling the truth about everything, from secret hotel rooms to million-dollar scams. A plan to get back at a bitter enemy, cameras hidden in room 7, and the shocking statement that ruined everything. This is the story that America's most famous televangelist tried to hide. Jim Swaggart was born in Faraday, Louisiana, on March 15, 1935. The town was small and didn't have any power or paved roads. His dad, Willie Leon's son Swaggart, played the fiddle and preached for the Pentecostal church. That's what his mother, Minnie Bell Heron, did for a living. Their lives were built around their faith. They were part of the God's Assemblies, a church that thought people could have spiritual skills like speaking in tongues. This love shaped Jimmy from a very young age. Church wasn't just something you did every Sunday. People went there to find hope. That party was loud, sad, and full of music. Her mother sang in the band. During church, his dad played the fiddle. He was born to play music, but he also likes to fight. He gambled and played pool as a teen, but he wouldn't use his singing skills outside of church. He thought that only God should have it. He said he felt called to teach when he was only 8 years old. He never got tired of that calling. But the first few years he was a preacher were hard. In the 1950s, he made only $30 a week, which was not even enough to pay his son and wife. They didn't have a place to live. They often stayed with other preachers or in the basements of churches. Francis Anderson was always by his side through everything. They got married on October 10, 1952. He was 17 years old and she was only 15. Her folks didn't like it. They wanted her to finish school and make things better for herself. Jimmy was set on making it happen, though. He may have lied on the marriage license about how old Francis was. They had nothing when they first got together. They didn't have any money after the wedding, so they moved in with Jimmy's folks. Francis's mother was very sad because she thought her daughter had given up too much. However, Francis believed in Jimmy's plan. She was there for him no matter what. Jimmy Swaggart had almost nothing when he began his mission in the 1950s. He preached wherever he could as he drove around rural Louisiana with his wife Frances and their young son Donnie. He only made $30 a week, which is around $290 now. His family had to live somewhere else because that wasn't enough to support them. They found shelter in church basements, small motels, and even the houses of pastors. Swaggart refused to give up, even though every day was hard. He preached anywhere people would pay attention. It took place sometimes in small churches in the country. Sometimes it was in a field on a flatbed cart. He kept going, even though many of the groups he spoke to could barely give him anything. Francis was there for him and helped him run the house while also supporting his mission. As a child, Donnie saw his parents give up everything for their faith. Even though life was hard, people could relate to what Swaggart preached. His drive, his desire, and his unwavering faith. People were interested in these things. His fan base slowly began to grow. Beginning in 1960, he started to record gospel songs and give sermons on Christian radio. Even though he was still poor, his voice was being heard by more people. He became the teacher he is today because of those hard years. They helped him really understand what it's like to struggle, which made his audiences able to connect. He was given a way out around the same time. His dream was to be signed by Sun Records' famous producer Sam Phillips as the label's first gospel act. Phillips had already made Elvis Presley famous, and Jerry Lee Lewis, Swaggart's cousin, was making a lot of money. Compared to Swaggart's $30 a week, that was huge money. Phillips thought Swaggart could make church music more popular with regular people. He knew there was a market for his skill because he saw it. He said no, though. He thought that preaching was his real calling, and that getting a record deal would take him away from that. He had more years of struggling financially after he left, but he never looked back. He made gospel records on his own instead, and millions of people bought them through the mail. He was able to use music in his work without giving up what he stood for. It was another big risk for him when he started the Camp Meeting Hour radio show in 1969. It would change everything. It was a small business at first. He mostly paid for it with his own sacrifices and a few gifts. In order to reach as many people as possible, he preached fiery talks and played gospel music, but he ran out of money after only a few shows. He didn't have enough airtime to keep the show going because it cost a lot. He was so desperate that he called for help on the radio. Within a few days, 900 letters showed up, with $3,000 inside. That was enough to keep the program going. After that, the camp meeting time started to get longer. It was on more than 650 stations across the country by the 1970s. His voice was no longer just heard in Louisiana. It was reaching the whole country. When Jimmy Swaggart became a TV minister in 1975, everything changed. His weekly show began on small stations in the area, but it didn't stay that way for long. People connected with his passionate preaching and gospel singing, and in just a few years, he had a huge following. By the early 1980 Swaggart shows were being shown in more than 143 countries and were being translated into many languages. He reached that many people, more than any other televangelist before him. Swaggart's shows were shown on more than 250 TV stations across the United States by 1983. Millions of people watched his daily Bible study shows every day. At his peak, 2.1 million homes in the U.S. watched him every week, making him one of the most watched religious figures of his time. People were interested in him because he could mix fiery lectures with soulful music, making his show an event that everyone has to see. It was just the right time for his quick rise. As streaming technology got better, Swaggart was able to grow even more. By the middle of the 1980s, his shows were being shown in more than just the U.S. People in Asia, Africa, and South America heard them. His impact went beyond religion in a big way. In the 1980s, he was a major player in the Christian right movement and was able to meet with President Ronald Reagan. But there were problems that came with such huge success. As the years went by, problems arose that could destroy everything he had worked for. When his government was at its peak, the numbers were mind-boggling. Jimmy Swaggart Ministries was making $150 million a year by 1987. That's more than $500 million every day. This huge amount of money came from gifts from viewers and sales of gospel records, books, and other items. His group was even in charge of one of Louisiana's biggest mail-order companies. Swaggart's offices in Baton Rouge showed how much money was coming in. His ministry was based on a huge campus with a Bible college, cutting-edge production facilities, and the Family Worship Center, a megachurch with 7,000 seats. It cost a lot of money to add the Zoe Vance Teleproduction Center, which was paid for by a $7 million gift from a rich donor. These high-end studios let Swaggart make TV shows at a level that not many others in the religious media industry could match. The money also paid for a fancy way of life. The house that Swaggart and his family lived in cost $1,500,000 and was on a 20-acre farm. It had a swimming pool and gold-plated fixtures. He flew in a private Gulfstream jet and drove a pair of expensive cars with his wife. Even though Swaggart ran a mission that didn't make money, he kept financial information secret by calling his group a church, which meant that it didn't have to share its finances with the public. Some people questioned the secret. It didn't stop millions of fans from giving, though. But that loyalty would be put to the test when scandals hit the ministry and things went wrong. The huge amount of mail that Swaggart's church got was one of the clearest signs of how powerful he was. At its busiest, more than 1 million letters came in every month. The ministry had its own mailing zip code because of all the mail. It wasn't just fan mail in these letters. They asked for prayers, told personal stories, and more importantly, asked for funds. To deal with the constant flood of mail, the church needed a huge staff. The headquarters of Swaggart had a lot of employees, making it one of the biggest companies in Baton Rouge. The letters were also a great way to raise money. They helped the ministry keep track of how engaged its audience was and improve its giving drives, which kept the money coming in. Swaggart had a lot of influence that went beyond TV. Through music and home recordings, he got his word out to millions of people by selling millions of gospel albums and videotapes. Fans were interested in him even when they weren't watching his shows because of his monthly magazine, The Evangelist. He became one of the most important people in televangelism because every platform he used helped him reach more people. Jimmy Swaggart was more than just a speaker. He had a lot of power. His sermons were not quiet times to think. They were raging firestorms full of anger, fear, and threats of punishment. He had more than 2.1 million weekly watchers in the U.S. in the 1980s, which made him one of the most famous televangelists of that time. It wasn't about gently persuasion when he preached. It was meant to wake people up. He drew very clear pictures of hell and heaven,